You are listening to a Sustainable World Radio podcast. Sustainable World Radio brings you in-depth interviews, news, and commentary about exciting, creative, and innovative ways of living. Produced in Santa Barbara, California, Sustainable World focuses on positive solutions to environmental challenges, solutions that adhere to the permaculture ethics, earth care, people care, fair share. Are you interested in learning more about permaculture projects around the globe, how to plant a food forest, restorative design, or ethnobotany? Then stay tuned to Sustainable World Radio. I'm Jill Cloutier. My co-hosts this morning are Wesley Rowe and Margie Bushman of the Santa Barbara Permaculture Network, and we're speaking with Tara Blasco and Lynn Hebenstreit of Global Resource Alliance about their work in Tanzania. I read a bit about what you've done in the past. You've done many, many things. You've been the owner of an industrial sewing machine company and an accounting consultant. How did you end up founding a nonprofit that works in Tanzania?
Well, for a long time, I had an interest in development and in some of the challenges that many communities around the world face. And I decided when my daughter was in college that I'd have enough time to devote a year to volunteer in an organization somewhere in the third world. And I thought my accounting skills would be the most valuable thing that I could contribute. So I put some notices out on the internet, and I was, hoping to end up in Asia, actually. I've always had an interest in Tibet. But an organization in Tanzania invited me to come. They needed a financial consultant, and I ended up going there for a couple of weeks just to check them out, and we were able to accomplish a lot of what needed to be done. And it became apparent that their biggest problem was really lack of funding and not lack of expertise. So I came back to the United States and started a small nonprofit in order to raise funds to fund some of the programs that they had planned.
And so you basically went there and then saw the need and then came back. Did you really think you could pull this off? It seems like such an ambitious project to me.
It didn't seem that ambitious because the projects that they had, at least to myself, seemed quite fundable. And not knowing anything about what I was getting into, I didn't have enough awareness to be dissuaded. So we just started out small, and I think in the first year we raised about $20,000 to fund an AIDS orphans program that they had. And we each year have been growing and growing slowly. So it wasn't, it was never a great challenge, never so difficult that it seemed like it was just too much. We've just been growing steadily ever since.
That's always a good thing to start out with, is not knowing what you're getting into. That can help start. Many great projects have started that way. And Tara, would you tell us how you got involved with GRA?
Okay. Well, I was living here in California. I come originally from Spain. I came to do my PhD, and I met Lynn, and he was telling me about his work in Africa. And I had been volunteering in different nonprofits since I was 14 years old. So it was something very close to my soul, and, well, I decided to come one time, and I fell in love with people there. I saw the great need and decided to become a volunteer, and have been very involved since, I think now it's 7 years.
I loved reading about your bios. We'll get into that in a bit later on in the show. So Lynn and Tara, whoever wants to answer this question, can you tell us a bit about the philosophy of GRA and maybe what community participatory development is and how that differs from regular development?
Our philosophy is that the communities themselves have a great base of resources available to them, including the members of the community and the natural resources available to them, and that by appropriating those resources, they can themselves create a life of abundance. So we try and work with local organizations there. We try to implement projects that are dear to them, and we're just sort of an assistance. We don't provide a lot of the direction of the projects there. We just try and support what's already been developing within the communities themselves.
There is also another point that we usually bring pioneer ideas and solutions to their problems. So we talk to them, we have the community being part in the process, and we ask for what they want, what they need, what is a priority for them, and then we try to find solutions that they are inexpensive, sustainable, and natural.
And it sounds like you're not going in with your own idea of how things should be there.
It's hard not to have our own ideas, I have to be honest, and of course, I have my own ways of doing things, but in the process we learn that it's always good to make sure that the impulse comes from them, because we have made a mistake of having a wonderful idea, for example, to bring a tree planting campaign and do all the work and finance it, and and finally all the trees are, after they have grown them, they're given to the community, but the community wasn't really behind, and most trees are being, they dried or they were eaten by the goats, things like that. So we really realize that if we have an idea and we just go with it without counting step by step with the community, then sometimes those ideas just don't follow through.
So it sounds like this process, the community participatory development, has shaped your organization through trial and error.
Mm-hmm, absolutely, yeah.
Now, Lynn, you might want to answer this one. Can you tell our listeners a bit about some of the challenges, some of the major challenges that are facing Tanzania today?
Well, they have a host of challenges. The area that we work in is on Lake Victoria. It's in the western part of the country. And water is probably the biggest problem that they have. We go to a number of villages, and we've had discussions with village councils and residents, and it's always water that their biggest concern is. After that, malaria is one of the biggest concerns. Everybody gets malaria 3-4 times a year. Some people get it 10 or 12 times a year. There's only a small percentage of the people using mosquito bed nets. After malaria, educational aspirations is another great concern. Tanzania values education a lot, and they always appreciate opportunities to expand their educational opportunities by building schools. They're always short of teachers. They're always asking us to try and find volunteers who can come and teach, especially in math and science. The food situation is difficult. They do grow quite a bit of food in our area. I mean, if you go to the market, there's wonderful vegetables, there's grains, they're quite abundant there. But the poverty is so great that many of the villagers can barely afford the meagerest of diets. So it's more of an economic rather than an agricultural challenge that they face in regard to food. But it is somewhat severe, and we do have a fund, a $5,000 fund that they've been using in one village for a number of years, where they buy a large truck full of maize and bring it back and sell it to the villagers at a discount. And apparently without that, there would be a lot of people that would be having a very hard time finding enough even maize to keep them going through the year.
So it sounds like a multifaceted, many challenges facing them. And I know Wes, and you might want to talk about this, Wes, has said in the past on this show that a lot of the challenges that we're seeing happen in Africa and in the two-thirds world we're going to be faced with many of those same challenges in the future.
Yeah, I think so.
Now, Lynn, could you tell us a bit about primary water and what that means? And we'll start with that challenge of water in Tanzania. I hadn't heard of it, and I'm just curious if you could tell our listeners, until I started researching for this show, can you tell them what that means, primary water, and what that is?
Yeah, you shouldn't feel alone in not knowing what primary water is. It's very, very hard to find people that have ever heard about it, let alone what it is, even though the concept is quite simple, and when you begin to explore it, it makes an awful lot of sense. But we have a lot of ideas that have been around for a century or more regarding hydrology, and these ideas have so much momentum or so much inertia that new ideas are sometimes hard to break in there. But the idea of primary water is that there is an enormous amount of water generated within the Earth's mantle. And the estimates vary from maybe 5 oceans to 100 oceans worth of water. And this water is under tremendous heat and pressure, of course. And as the molten lava moves towards the crust of the Earth, the rock can hold less water because the pressure and the temperature are dropping, and so the water is forced out of the molten rock. And when it reaches the crust, it's in the vapor form at this point, and it is forced into all of the fractures and fissures in the crust as a vapor, and it can travel hundreds of kilometers through various networks of fractures, and eventually it finds its way up to near the surface, and at that point it is water and can be accessed from above.
That's so interesting to me. Now, how do you find the water that's trapped in primary rock, and how do you extract it? And does this extraction, well, that's too many questions. Let's start with how do you find it, and then we'll go into the extraction part.
The guy who in this century has done the most to develop techniques to access this water, he came to the United States in the 1920s from Austria, I believe it was, and he worked with Herbert Hoover's company, a mining company in the Sierra Nevadas. And he worked many years for the company, and they sent him all over the world exploring different mines. And one of the things that he noticed was that most all of the large mines were flooded out rather than mined out. And, he thought that was very curious, and so he had a tremendous opportunity to look at the inside of the Earth and see what was going on and see where these water-bearing structures were. And he gradually, over decades, developed a pretty good sense of what kind of rock formations you were likely to find this water in. And this water is generally in large volumes, and it's under great pressure. So he was able to tell by surface geology and also by an analysis of the rocks that came out of cuttings, which were likely to be able to produce a good quantity of water. He used a little bit of instrumentation, a magnetometer at the time, to help get a signature of the underlying strata. And presently, our volunteer water guru, Paul Power, uses a combination of observation. He's able to look at the geology of an area. He's able to look at fractures, especially in the area in Africa where we work. There's a lot of exposed bedrock, and we can see fracture structures from above pretty well, and that's a great help. And he's able to see vegetation, which indicates certain trees have deep roots. And when you see one of these trees around, you get suspicious that, especially if there's no other trees in the area, that it's feeding off of some source of water, a perennial source of water. And sometimes you'll see a string of these trees in a long line, and then you're really looking at something good because they're probably tying into a fracture. Even the animal life will give some indications. Often we find that large anthills, and the anthills in Africa are nothing like we have here. I mean, they're mountains. They can be 6-8 feet tall. And these ant colonies, often we find them near our drill sites. So he's also a dowser, and that's kind of his last resort. Once he's zeroed in on a spot, then he gets his sticks out, and he does some dowsing to try and pinpoint the best location.
So you're drilling holes into the rock. What effect, does this have a detrimental effect on the wildlife in the area, or does it deplete groundwater?
Well, that's a question that we will try and address. I can only give you an example of the abundance of this water. In Australia, there's something called the Great Artesian Basin, and it takes up a large part of eastern Australia in the interior, probably maybe 30% of the country, or no, less than that, maybe 20%. But it's a very large area of the interior, and it has an underlying reservoir of primary water. There's always a mixing of primary water and rainwater because the water, the primary water is pushing up and the rainwater is seeping down, and they always come together. It's never a watertight seal in the earth. But this area, about, I think it was in the 1880s, they started drilling, and they encountered artesian wells that, once drilling to about 1,300 meters, they would hit water that would rise about 100 feet in the air out of the hole. And a typical production would be about 1 million gallons a day. And they just let these things run. They created these long ditches that would take the water. Sometimes they would go 100 kilometers and feed livestock and trees in the area. And those wells, they eventually drilled 1,500 wells. And the majority of them they just let run constantly, day and night, at 1 million gallons a day. And over the last approximately 100 years, the production has dropped off probably about 50%. So the wells that we have, don't produce anywhere near 1 million gallons a day. We install hand pumps on these, and we can pump about probably, I think in liters when I'm in Africa, about a maximum of 20,000 liters a day. So that's, I don't know, somewhere a tiny, tiny fraction of what's been happening in Australia. So we don't expect any real noticeable effect in the hydrology of the region or the underground water. And the water is coming from narrow veins in solid rock, and generally we encounter those about 50 meters below the surface through mostly solid bedrock. So it's not like we're dipping into a reservoir and slowly the entire reservoir is going down. Each water source is independent to a great deal from one another. So the effect on the environment is really very minimal.
Lynn, this is Wes. Margie and I were in Mexico in about 2001, and we were in this silver mining town from the 1600s. And what we noticed, we went up to visit all the different silver mines that are abandoned, and most of them have water flowing out of them, and they're tapped into agriculture. Some feeding, down about a couple of thousand feet to huge areas of food growing, and others feeding into terraces along the hill and have been doing that for hundreds of years. So to just, give you some backup to what you were talking about, the mining. And the question I think I'm going to ask is, talk a little bit about how you designed and got the drilling operation going, how you got it built here in the United States, and the simplicity and elegance that you used to pick this particular design, and then taking it to Tanzania and actually drilling some wells already.
Well, all of our technical guidance comes from Paul Power. He's been doing this for, I guess about 40 years now, and according to him, he's drilled over 1,000 wells, and he spent many years with Stephen Reese. So we just sort of looked to him to lead us in the right direction. He was very particular about the drilling rig. We ended up going to the Kootenay Mountains in Canada to observe one of these rigs in operation. There's not a lot of them doing what we're doing, drilling into hard bedrock. So we were able to get a reference to a contractor who's drilling geothermal holes in Canada, and the rig seemed to be very well suited as a lightweight rig that could be easily maneuvered into difficult situations, and as a relatively inexpensive rig, it was approximately $125,000, and it was doing quite a good job. Even though they were only drilling 4-inch holes in Canada, it was doing it at a rate that Paul thought was totally acceptable. So one of the most important things is to match the drilling rig with the air compressor, and you have to have them sized right in order for them to work efficiently together. So we ended up buying our air compressor from Belgium. It's an Atlas Copco air compressor. It's one of the best air compressors in the world. And the drilling rig was manufactured by Deep Rock Manufacturing in Alabama. So it takes a while to build one of those. It took us, must have been about 3 months before they had built the unit, and then it's another couple more months to get it shipped to Africa, and getting it into an African country can be a little tricky. You never have the right paperwork, and it always takes much longer than you expect to do everything, but eventually we succeeded in getting everything across the border and safely into our compound.
What an adventure, I bet. Tara, I have a question for you and Lynn, but let's hear from Tara. When you told people in Tanzania that you were going to be getting water out of rocks, did they just think you were nuts? What did they did they believe you, and what has been the reaction of the people there?
You know what is very interesting with Tanzanians is that they're actually very open to our suggestions, to our ideas. So people are much more kind of okay with whatever it is than maybe in this country. So we have encountered a lot of kind of open arms for anything that we bring. And of course, water is their main priority. So if we say that it's found in rock, they say, okay, good, let's go for it. We have a very interesting, story of an old she was 80 years old woman, that she heard that there was water coming to her village, and she was blind, and that the water was coming from underneath the earth, from the rock, and she couldn't believe that. So she asked her grandson to take her there so she could touch it with her own hands. And we have amazing pictures of her just coming and just having, the water coming out of this drilling equipment machine from the hole, and just having the water touching her face, and just really being in awe that she was really, feeling a clean water. That's something that she probably never have seen in her village. Wow, so although it's an unusual concept, people are kind of open to it.
And how do you envision this changing the lives of the people in Tanzania, having this water available? Maybe compare and contrast what the situation is like for them now with water and what you hope to see happen.
Yeah, well, I think it's already changing a lot of lives. We have now 13 wells, and we have drilled 13 wells. 2 of them already have the pump going. So several thousands of people are already getting water, and it will continue, giving clean drinking water to many, many thousands of people every year. So the changes, I think, they are going to be incredible. I mean, from just plain survival, people will be able to drink water that won't kill them, because, so many people are dying because of waterborne diseases in this area and all over the world. So just living, and then, time-wise, you probably know, and people know that women and girls are the ones that have to walk to take drinking water to the boreholes, in their areas. So they spend hours of their days just walking to get water to ponds, to the lake. It's always contaminated water. So just having that access to clean water closer to their homes is going to save them a lot of time as well.
This is Margie, and we're here today because we're connected through permaculture to Lynn and Tara and the GRA and what's happening in Tanzania. And I'd love to hear how permaculture came to the work that you're doing and to the work in Tanzania. But also, since we're all off to the International Permaculture Convergence and Conference in November of this year, we're especially interested in some of the work you're doing around malaria and the neem plant and some of the other alternative medicine that you're doing at the center.
Well, Tara's the expert on that, so I'm going to have her.
Okay, so the malaria project. Well, this happened several years ago. One of our collaborators there in Tanzania, he had twins. They were, 1 or 2 year old children, and one of them died because of malaria. So I remember he was devastated. He wrote us an email saying, "And I hope that you will find a solution for malaria." And we said to ourselves, yes, sure, we're going to find a solution for malaria. There are so many people looking for that, and, it's not that simple. But we decided to do our part and to research and look for natural, sustainable solutions for malaria. And after a long time, we came across neem. Neem is a tree that grows in many places. It's originally from India, and it's also extended now in Africa. And it has a lot of properties, and it heals a lot of things. And one of them is malaria. They have been using it to treat malaria for centuries in India. So we're interested in neem. We did a lot of research. We found out that it can be toxic if it is taken regularly. Although, there are different studies like in all these things, and people say it can be toxic. When you talk to people, the Neem Foundation in India, they say, come on, we have been using this forever. It's non-toxic. But anyway, we wanted to find a way to take neem as a prevention, which will mean taking it regularly and to ensure that it won't have side effects. So we came across to an organization in Kenya that is called Avalite Foundation. And it's, one of the people there that is running it, she's a homeopath. And she has discovered a way to take the neem in a tincture that is homeopathic. So you know that homeopathy is based on dissolving the substance that you're using in so many times, so many dilutions, that finally you end up with a product that has a very, very, very little amount of the original substance that you're using. Is very diluted, but at the same time is very powerful. So that's what we thought that will probably be a good solution for trying to use something to prevent malaria that people could use on a regular basis, and it won't have side effects. So we talked to them, and we learned that they had been using it for a while, and it was working really well. So they were, we bought it from them for a year or two, and they were kind enough to tell us the formula. So we were able to teach this formula to a herbalist in Tanzania, in our area in Musoma. And then our intention has always been to create something that will be really cheap, really affordable, and also that we could teach to the villages. So that's what we did. The herbalist has been training now. I think we're up to 14 or 15 groups from different villages in the area and in town. And we give them training. It's normally, he goes 3 times, like 3 weekends or so. He teaches a team of leaders, which is, 3 or 4 or 5 people that are good, or, they're good learners, and that they know how to be in connection with the community so that they will produce the herbs, the tincture, and then they will be selling to a very low cost to their communities. So this has been really effective. We have done several informal studies. We did a pilot study that we published, and between 50-70% of reduction in malaria cases, just taking these drops for prevention.
That is amazing. And there was another plant that I read about on your website, and I could be pronouncing it wrong, Moringa oleifera, and that had 7 times, the leaves of this tree have 7 times the vitamin C of oranges, 4 times the calcium of milk, 4 times the vitamin A of carrots, and the list goes on and on of all the beneficial nutrient of these leaves. Could you tell our listeners about this plant as well? And I think that's something that people should know about. And also the seeds of this tree can be used for water purification.
Yeah. Well, Moringa oleifera is quite an amazing tree. We were also very surprised to learn all the good qualities that it has. It's basically like the multivitamin supplement of the tropics of developing countries. The tree is just growing everywhere, and most people in the area don't know about the benefits. So what we have learned is that if you just take the leaves and dry them and grind them, you can just put it in your any kind of food. It tastes pretty okay, and it's just gives, as you were saying, so many vitamins and minerals. That is really, it has a lot of protein as well. So for poor diets, it's really an amazing solution. So far we have been just, drying and packaging it. The herbalist does that, and we're bringing it and experimenting in a nursery school with 250 children. And since we introduced Moringa oleifera in their diet, they're actually doing much better. So we're getting reports they look healthier, they have less illnesses. So it's working well, and we want to promote it further. We have only started to promote Moringa oleifera. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like the solutions to many of these problems are right under growing in the land there, and also under the Tanzanians' feet, which is interesting with the water.
Yeah, and one thing I forgot to mention, you talk about the seeds of Moringa oleifera. They are a good system to purify water. You have to kind of smash those seeds, and there's a whole process that is involved. But we have used it some, but we have discovered that there is a much simpler and cheaper way to purify water, and this is with solar cooking materials, and I can talk about it later on.
Well, solar cooking, too, that brings me to my next question. I think that in the area where you were, there were challenges with fuels having a detrimental effect. The people were deforesting the areas by cutting down trees for fuel, and I think that you have helped introduce more widespread solar cooking in the area. Could you tell us about that?
Well, again, this was another of the challenges that when we were coming to the Lake Victoria, we were seeing how people cut trees and they produce a charcoal that is like they burn the branches, and it turns into a dark kind of coil, and they sell this in the market. It's very expensive, extremely expensive for their economy, and also it really burns a lot of trees. So we knew, and it produces smoke in the houses, so it's very unhealthy. So we knew that wasn't a solution. we have been looking for years. We came across biogas composters, and we tried to produce them, but at least the ones we saw in Musoma that another organization was producing, they were too complicated to use, in every house. They were expensive to produce. And we find also other solutions like jatropha oil. And, there were possible things, but we were not really satisfied with the results. But last year, we were introduced to solar cooking. And we have heard about it before, and we thought that it will take too many hours to cook food, so we kind of decided to put it aside. But we learned that indeed, although it takes, an average of a couple of hours to cook a meal, there is a lot of time and a lot of sun in Tanzania, and it's just free. So it's actually a very, very nice and sustainable solution. We are producing, and we have learned this from Solar Cooking International, that they are here. They started in California, and now they have, they're working in different areas in the planet. They have a good office in Kenya, so we have been collaborating with them. And at the moment, we have produced several trainings for local people. People love it because, it's quite amazing. You have a piece of cardboard with aluminum foil covering the inside. Then you need a dark pot. A black pot is what we do, so sometimes we have to paint it with non-toxic material. And then to accelerate the process, you want to put that pot where you put all your food in a plastic transparent bag and leave it in the solar cooker for, as I say, a couple of hours, 2-3 hours, depending on what you're cooking. And without doing anything, you don't have to attend it. You can be working in your garden. You can be, taking care of your children. You can be doing anything. You come back in a few hours, and the meal is there ready for you to eat. So it works really well.
Just wanted to add one thing on solar cooking that I was very surprised and amazed to hear. According to the Solar Cooker International Research, anyway, they claim that more children die from indoor smoke than from malaria. So it's a very serious problem. In addition to the deforestation, the health implications are really significant for the way that they cook the traditional cook methods in the house.
That's a tragedy. That's horrible. It sounds like solar cooking definitely has a bright and shining future in Tanzania. Margie, I believe Margie had a question for you.
Sure. I just wanted to say one more time, our really wonderful connection is through permaculture. And we met Lynn and Tara at an event that Santa Barbara Permaculture Network organized in 2006 that was called Permaculture and Sustainable Aid for the 21st Century. And that's how we came together. And that was with Jeff Lawton and his wife Nadia and Andrew Jones. And then later, a permaculture design course was held in Tanzania with Jeff Lawton. And I wondered how permaculture was received. I know that you had a farm manager who already was very skilled in organic growing and other sustainable agriculture, but how was permaculture received?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we organized, we met as Margie is saying, we met Jeff and Nadia in Santa Barbara, and we were really impressed by their work, and we thought that he would do a good job bringing this approach, permaculture, to Musoma, because he had been teaching all over the world, and he knew how to teach something as kind of, it has a lot of, it's not complicated, but it's kind of has a lot of aspects to it that is permaculture. But he had taught it to developing countries, and he knew how to make it simple. So we took him. He came for a couple of weeks to do a full training. We had nearly 40 people. Half of them were Tanzanians, and the others were from all over the world. And everybody was totally excited, learned a lot, enjoyed his way of teaching, and started to implement as much as possible right after the training. So people are taking it very well. As I say, it has a lot of aspects to it, so it's not something that you can kind of teach in a day or two. At least that's my experience. But, we were able to develop now 2 plots, and they are run by local people, and they're being used as demonstration plots so that other people can come and start learning the basics. And we always have an influx of international volunteers that they bring more expertise to the project and new ideas about how to implement permaculture, how to design a plot, and it's a growing project, and it's very exciting for us.
I have one question for both of you, and maybe each one, probably to Lynn, and then Tara, the other one. What is the most joyous thing that has happened for you, and what is the most challenging for your work? So if either one of you wants to take the first and then the second one.
Well, I would say that the most joyous aspect of the work is the people that we work with, the community that we've developed there. We have a network of close friends that are really almost like family, and it's just a joy working with them. There's something about a cross-cultural connection that somehow enhances the human relationships, because we each come from such different backgrounds, but when we do connect, it has that much richer quality to it. So the most challenging, I think, has to be dealing with the government. Every time we have to get something from the government, it's an ordeal, and we often accomplish getting something, but then only to find that it wasn't the right office or it wasn't the right district, and we have to go somewhere else, and we have to do something else, and it's just, you never know what to expect, but it's always not what you expect.
Okay, and I can answer that's a very good question. I think what gives me more joy is really people, is to see, the hope in the eyes of people that didn't have hope before, and to see their gratitude and to also see their pain. I mean, people are having a very hard time in general, and still you see a lot of smiles in the street. Their challenges are huge. I mean, they're enormous to our Western eyes. Just being all the time, knowing that any time you can get really sick with illness, you might not have enough to eat. I mean, the challenges are really big, and, the average of lifespan is maybe 40-some years old. So in the middle of that, to see the joy of people and their responses to being helped and support is really wonderful. I think the most challenging for me is really how long everything takes, because I am I am on the fast I like things to happen quickly and efficiently. And dealing with the tropics, there is a kind of a slow pace in them. They like to go slowly, and with the weather, and they are not so focused in being efficient as we are. So sometimes things that I think they will take a week, they might take 3 months, and that sometimes is frustrating. But it goes with the territory that if we want it to come from them, we have to wait for them to set the pace. So it's a good learning.
And you actually have a fundraiser coming up on Sunday, June 28th from 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. Could you tell us about the fundraiser this Sunday?
Yes, we have a fundraiser in Ojai at the Ojai Retreat. The space has been donated to us for the day. It's a beautiful location in Miners Oaks, which is really part of Ojai. We're going to have a free gourmet vegetarian lunch prepared by the former head cook of the Seven Ray Institute in Topanga Canyon. And we're going to be showing 2 DVDs, one about the water project, a short one of about 10 minutes on our water project in Tanzania, and the second one is about 25 minutes, and it is kind of an overview of the work we're doing in Tanzania. After that, we have a silent auction. There's been a number of people donating various things from astrology readings to motorcycle jackets to our largest offering is a collection of Beatrice Wood pottery. Beatrice Wood is a very well-known artist in Ojai. She died about 10 years ago, but she's quite well-known even in other parts of the country, and this is some beautiful pottery, a collection of 7 pieces of hers. And then we're going to have a group from Santa Barbara that does African singing, dancing, and drumming.
Tansumo is the name of the group. Tansumo.
And then it'll be over.
And the website is?
The website is www.globalresourcealliance.org.
Okay, and that's alliance with 2 L's for those who have a hard time spelling sometimes. globalresourcealliance.org. Well, thank you so much, Lynn and Tara. It's been great speaking with you today.
Been great speaking with you, Jill, and Margie and Wes. We appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
You've been listening to a Sustainable World Radio podcast. For more information or to hear our other podcasts or interviews, visit www.sustainableworldradio.com. Sustainable World Radio is produced by Jill Cloutier. Music by Dana Lyons. Thanks for listening.